Monetary policy of any country, it could be India, Japan, US, all have a twin mandate for both price stability and growth. Strictly speaking, these two metrics, that is inflation control and growth, are actually contradictory to one another. Meaning, if you control price, you will stifle growth. If you have growth policies, prices will automatically rise. So the biggest challenge for any government and monetary policy authorities are how to strike a balance between growth and inflation. Now, most major economies aim for low and stable inflation. Some countries have publicly announced inflation targets. For example, US, Europe, Japan, and many other countries have targeted inflation of 2%, whereas India's RBI has targeted 4% with a plus or a minus of 2% on either side. So it could be anywhere between 2% to 6%. There are many monetary and fiscal tools for achieving a targeted inflation rate and growth rates. The lever for both these is interest rates. Manipulate the interest rates to increase or decrease the money supply and control the price rise or encourage growth. As simple as that. So when you increase the interest rates, money supply contracts, inflation comes down. When you decrease the interest rates, you increase the money supply, the aggregate demand increases, the economy grows. Having given you an idea of how inflation is dealt and how the growth occurs, let's move forward. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Think and Link series. I'm your host, Srinivas. And today we will converse on an important macroeconomic policy tool, yield curve control, which Japan has currently employed for getting its inflation to the 2% target and for fostering economic growth. Japan has employed YCC. I'm using a short form, that is yield curve control, since 2016 to control, regulate, and monitor the health of its economy. Now, before we get details into that, a few things about Japan. Nikkei 225, that is Nikkei stock average, is the stock market index for Tokyo Stock Exchange. It hit a record high of 38,957 way back on December 29th, 1989. I repeat, December 29, 1989. And only this year, that is 2024, 34 years later, Nikkei has reached this figure. So you can easily infer the state of equities market during the last 3 decades in Japan. Again, going back in 1995, Japan's asset bubble burst and the lost decades began. In its wake, Japan had to undertake balance sheet repair in the banking system because it was badly damaged. Corporates had to deleverage. Households were compelled to tighten their belts in an attempt to build their net worth. Now, all these combined went to suppress on the demand, and the Japanese economy experienced deflationary conditions and fell into recession. The Bank of Japan attempted quantitative easing. Now, what is quantitative easing, which was adopted by Japan in 2001? The Bank of Japan flooded the commercial banks with excess liquidity to promote private lending. Banks had large stocks of excess reserves and therefore little risk of any liquidity shortage. Banks and financial institutions were encouraged to go all out for lending and prop up the economy. But this did not improve Japanese economy, which continued slipping. In 2008, in wake of the global financial crisis, Japan, which was already in a moribund state, was severely impacted. Japan's high dependency on the world market, coupled with a lack of international demand for Japanese products, led to a historically low exports. This was again a big blow to the economy. Bank of Japan and Japanese government were in a quandary, unable to figure out what needs to be done. In 2013, the Japanese central bank tried quantitative and qualitative easing, or what is called as QQE. Now, the QQE policy, which it introduced, was very simple. It expected that the interest rate differential between Japan and United States would increase, leading to the depreciation of yen exchange rate. So if yen depreciates, obviously it means there's going to be an increase in exports and services. It would improve the output gap as well as inflation. That was what the original idea of QQE was. Unfortunately, even that did not work. Now, for the sake of the viewers, I would like to explain what this output gap is. The output gap is also called as the GDP gap. It is the difference between the actual output in an economy and the potential output. Now, this particular gap enables the country to identify the current economic position over a business cycle. So, in a business cycle, typically you have expansion stage, you have peak, contraction, trough, right? So, by identifying the output gap, you will be able to tell where exactly or in which position or in which stage your economy is sitting. And this measure of output gap is largely used in macroeconomic policy. But even this policy wasn't very successful. So in 2016, Bank of Japan then cut short-term rates below zero to fend off any unwelcome yen rise because any if yen were to become strong, it would affect exports. So what it did, it cut the short-term rates below zero. It also introduced a negative interest rate policy to spur economic activity and growth. Now, this move crushed yields across the curve, and financial institutions were outraged and saw returns on their investments evaporate. The BOJ, that is the Bank of Japan, quickly corrected it. So, in September 2016, to pull long term rates back, Bank of Japan adopted the yield control curve. That is, this new monetary policy. The fundamental purpose of YCC was to introduce a dose of inflation in the deflationary Japan and kickstart the economy, which had fallen into a deep stupor since 1990s. Now, YCC was to encourage borrowers to undertake capex, that is, capital expenditure, while at the same time improve the returns for pension and insurance funds. So, under YCC, what Bank of Japan did was it was targeting short-term interest rate at negative 0.1% and the 10-year government bond yield at 0%. It also set an allowance band of 0.5% above and below the yield target. Now, YCC had an advantage of allowing only that much bonds to be bought that was needed to achieve 0% yield target, unlike the earlier quantitative easing where the government had to buy all the bonds which were tendered. So, Bank of Japan thought that YCC was a panacea for the moribund Japanese economy, but it was not so. Even YCC came in for a lot of criticism for distorting markets by keeping long term interest rates from rising. Come the COVID period. During the COVID pandemic, the rise in food and fuel prices impacted Japanese economy. Inflation started rising. It had a very severe impact on Japan's GDP. In 2020, Japan's GDP decreased by 4.5%. However, it was able to grow in 2021 by 1.7%, but again stagnated by 1.4% in 2022, and it grew by 1.9% in 2023. Then, in February 2024, Bank of Japan officially ended its commitment to buy an unlimited amount of Japanese government bonds, signaling a likely shift towards ending of YCC and hiking interest rate in 2024. Japan's inflation is currently at 2.60%, and it is likely that Bank of Japan may tweak YCC as an attempt to make the Bank of Japan's ultra loose policy more sustainable rather than bring about a full fledged interest rate high cycle, which may come pretty later. So, BOJ could end its negative interest rate policy, but it has said that only when it achieves its 2% inflation target, only if that is in sight, will there be a possible interest rate hikes. Once BOG is convinced that Japan will see a sustained rise in inflation accompanied by wage growth, BOJ could begin hiking interest rates. The policy shifts is expected to be pretty gradual. So, in all likelihoods, it is curtains for YCC policy, that is yield control curve policy. I expect by April. April is the likely time frame for ending this negative rates. And probably the BOJ may start hiking rates somewhere from the month of September. I'm sure that you have understood what YCC is, and I'm sure that you have found this particular video informative and knowledge imparting. If it is so, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. See you in another episode. Till then,